Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today's show, we're going to be talking about acquisitions and mergers, and obviously, the person I'm talking to, I'm going to deem him the acquisition boss for obvious reason. So, Kison, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what are we going to be talking about in more detail today?
Sure. I'm Kison Patel, CEO and founder of a business called M&A Science that is a suite of different products geared towards the industry of mergers and acquisitions.
Mhm.
We focus on the corporate sector. A lot of our clients are larger multinational corporations that do quite a bit of M&A. They're doing at least three transactions a year. It's a part of their growth strategy. I've spent about 10 years as an advisor, wanted to get into the tech space, got involved with the startup that didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, but exposed me to the way software engineers would utilize project management tools to make their approach of developing software more efficient. That really intrigued me and kept referencing back to my experience in M&A and thought, why didn't we have tools like this? Would have made things a lot easier, more efficient. And that led to the inspiration of starting a company in DealRoom in 2012. And that evolved as technology products do around 2017. A good marketer friend of mine got me into podcasting, started a podcast called M&A Science, which evolved into a full digital media business that we run today. So a lot of our product lines that we've added since then are all geared towards education and training for the industry or technology tools to help optimize the process.
So it seems like you're maximizing growth strategies across the board. I mean, obviously you're helping your clients with growth strategies, but you're also demonstrating it for yourself internally as well, going from like a software platform like DealRoom and going into a podcast and then kind of creating this whole ensemble of education packages included. Is that correct?
It's problem solving. You solve a problem and then you develop that as your capability, your ability to solve the problem and create value, find adjacencies. What's the next thing that's close to it? And you'll find them and keep at it. And that's how we ended up with a portfolio of solutions.
Hmm. So out of the three solutions that I mean, obviously you've grown into, right? I mean, I say you probably grown into more like an agency format. Like, which one kind of pulls at your heartstrings more?
It's tough because I say there's two big products that I like. There's DealRoom, which is the first product suite that we created, and that single product became a lifecycle management solution.
Mm.
So it's really a pretty beefy, complex solution that solves a lot of problems across so many life cycle. And it's one we've worked on the longest. It's a pretty big business line for us. But I think adjacent to that is this framework. We published a book a few years ago called Agile M&A. It was based on case studies we did with Google and Atlassian, how they use these agile techniques from their engineering culture into their M&A process with a lot of great success. And it's not a revenue driver for us at all. It's a complete open source initiative. The reason I'm drawn into is the impact we're making in the industry. This is this crowdsourcing model to take all these best practices, make it publicly available so anybody can get access to it. If you wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be an M&A practitioner, now you got this comprehensive resource that you can start learning that's the best of from top level practitioners and get you that skill set you need to go out and actively pursue a career in the field.
Nice, nice. I mean, I just hearing you speak about like M&A, and for the listener that doesn't know what M&A is, obviously it's talking about mergers and acquisitions, right? And you keep saying a practitioner, kind of like you're a doctor going to surgery. So I want to like talk about that a little bit more. Like what do you actually do with, for example, DealRoom? Let's say I'm coming to you and I'm saying, hey guys, I have this particular software platform. I have this corporation that backs it. We're netting say $10 million per year, but we're looking to assume some new products to scale. What's the next step?
Sure. In a corporate environment, when they're buying companies, there's a lot of people involved. You're going to have this core corporate development team that typically is relatively small. Oftentimes, we're working with 1 to 10 billion market cap companies, and that team size around 3 to 10 people. And they're responsible for inorganic growth, which oftentimes M&A is the tool that they use to pursue those opportunities. This team would lead identifying opportunities. They may work with other business leaders in the organization, and they extend the network of different investment bankers, private equity firms to have these relationships to identify opportunities in the market. When they find one, That's when they'll do evaluation. They may help lead that to get a sense of what's this value to our company and manage the process. But as they progress the process of buying the company, more and more people get involved. You're going to bring in these functional leaders from the different departments, your legal, HR, IT, marketing, so forth, and they're going to help do the diligence. And
Hmm.
diligence essentially means study, but what we're looking for is the risk. We want to make sure what we're spending for this business, uh, what's represented is accurate, that we're getting what we're paying for. You want to make sure there's no big red flags or surprises that catch us that may compromise that value that we're spending. And that's a big thing is if we do identify risk, because things will always pop up, can we mitigate it? Do we have a plan to make sure we're comfortable with it and get to that point we're really comfortable to close? Also at that time, we want to plan on what we're going to do with this business after we buy it. This market is hyper competitive. When you're buying a business, you're typically paying a premium for it and anticipating on unlocking value through a series of events after you close on the business, which in corporate lingo, they'll frame as cost synergies or revenue synergies. Cost synergies meaning, hey, we don't need two CFOs, we don't need two backend support functions. We're going to eliminate one, we're going to combine them together, reduce some costs. That's where we're going to get value add right there through these reduction of costs and activities around that. Then the revenue synergy side, what are the areas that we can grow revenues? Maybe we're a large corporation that has a massive distribution across 1,000 sales reps, and we're going to take this new tech widget product and train our sales reps to sell it. Now, all of a sudden, they were growing, a couple million a year, but with 1,000 reps selling it, we're going to start increasing that by a significant amount every year after year, and we're anticipating on that. So that's the big thing. We want to really plan on those activities while we're doing diligence to make sure once we close on this deal, we can hit the ground running and unlock that value. And that's the magic of why we're doing these deals. If we're bringing a new product to make us more competitive in the market, and then there's various drivers entering new markets and so forth.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you're like a puppeteer. You're moving multiple different strings in the process of doing your due diligence. So I mean, with that, I mean, is deal room something that where you can capture these data points? And again, I'm saying like if somebody's coming to you, you're gonna have to have like some kind of ongoing checklist to say, okay, this is a major red flag and is a no go. We're not signing on the dotted line.
So the deal room solution emerged. The industry I noticed was pretty stagnant. When I worked in the field, we'd use Excel for everything. You're using an Excel sheet to manage all the things that need to happen. So early stage, I have an Excel tracker to manage the companies I'm tracking to know which ones we want to go after. And then I get to that point, we get the conversation, and we officially launch a diligence process. Then that list gets bigger of all the information I need from the company to review. I get more people involved. They're asking for additional information. We're requesting documentation back and forth. Traditionally, they would use a virtual data room, and they were pretty expensive solutions. They charge you per page. Again, pretty antiquated model today. Like, why are we charging page for anything? Everything's in the cloud. And they're using Excel tracker back and forth. Here's a little index number to go find in the data room. Pretty clunky process. And then integration, same thing, massive Excel list tracking who's doing what. So really for us is to come in and replace that with one tech stack, saying, hey, here's a portal that's actually designed for M&A that allows you to manage your pipeline, manage your diligence process, all those to-do lists, and the file security, because we got this sensitivity between buyers and sellers. I'm sharing data. You don't quite own the business. This is stuff that's confidential. You probably got a confidentiality agreement we're going to sign to make sure that you don't share this beyond. And after we disband from the deal, you're going to destroy or what you're going to do or can and can't do with information. But we want to manage all of that. And then you improve it. You say, hey, because we're not bouncing around with all these different tools, we have everything in one portal. We can build some nice workflows. So if I ask for a document, I can just drag and drop that document to that request, and it automatically does the rest. It'll put it in the file security repository, link it to the request. I can manage all the permissions, make sure the right eyeballs are looking at it. And then the people that are going to prepare the integration work, I can give them access to it, and everything's in one place. So just a lot of efficiency when it comes to data management and unlocking the capabilities for collaboration between these different teams that may be internal in the company, an external outside consultant, or with that counterparty, the other side.
Nice, nice. So it seems like you created an encompassing system that has SOPs built into it. You have like some automation built into it as well. You have security, and that kind of leads me to like my next question about security. Are you dealing with more so publicly traded companies? Do you have to deal with FINRA in any aspect of what you're doing?
FINRA comes up with investment banks. I wouldn't say that's the biggest thing for us when we work with larger corporations. It's their IT security review. We've seen in the news some big breaches, the SolarWinds, Okta, and that's some things that raise more concerns across the board. Nobody wants to be the next headline PR of a breach. And it makes such an impact on the business and how they got to respond to it. So now everybody's even being more sensitive, and their vendor reviews are becoming more stringent. So for us, it's a lot of resources we have to add to respond to a lot of the security reviews when we're trying to onboard a new client, and also just constantly investing in the platform, constantly investing in our security infrastructure, bringing resources in there, getting more certifications and credentials. SOC 2 is becoming almost a standardization where you have to have it, you have to keep up with it. And people are asking to see those reports. They want to see your pen test that you're doing, and just continuously making sure you're evolving and staying on top of security standards.
Nice, nice. So just talk about like range, right? I mean, obviously the scope of work can be very variable, right? So I mean, like, what's the smallest acquisition to the largest acquisition that you guys have handled before?
We have a product called
Mm-hmm.
firmroom.com, and that's designed for smaller transactions. We designed it for like $5 to $20 million transactions. We just noticed they'd come up, and our deal room solution wasn't a right size and pricing fit for those type of transactions. So the smaller ones are there to self-service model. But large scale, it varies quite a bit. We set up the infrastructure for corporations so they can run multiple activities concurrently, whether it's selling an asset, buying an asset. They may do a tiny little acquihire, buying a small 5-person team, getting them in there. Pretty straightforward. But we've had last year, Emerson did $11 billion transaction through the platform, and it's large scale. They're carving out a couple of business lines, integrating into this new platform they acquired. So there's a lot of people involved when you're doing larger transaction. But for the most part, it's working with a corporation to set up their infrastructure so they have the capability to whether do large transaction, small transaction, or just the volume of transactions.
Wow, wow. So I mean, let's talk about you, like on the personal side a little bit. 'Cause I mean, I don't want to dive down that road too far. Because I mean, I love what you do, and I'm loving your platform, and I'm loving the infrastructure that you have. But I just want to know a little bit more about you. Like, if you could define yourself in 3 to 5 words, what 3 to 5 words would you choose?
I'd hit my values: discipline, continuous learning, and empathetic.
Hmm, empathetic. Interesting. So let's go back. Let's go back in time a little bit. Like, what kind of kid were you growing up? Were you kind of like the kid, and I make this facetious joke about, were you the kid that was memorizing the almanac, or were you more so a kid that was going out playing baseball?
I was a kid that was always trying to make a buck somewhere. I remember even 13 years old, I saw a big demand for the kids that want to smoke cigarettes and be cool. And then there's a population of other kids that were always smoking cigarettes.
Mm,
And next thing you know, I'm asking like, "Hey, where do you get the cigarettes from?" And I'm turning my locker into a tobacco shop when I was 13, peddling cigarettes, chewing tobacco, and cigars. And at the time, with immigrant parents, they're not investing a lot in your outfit so that you can look cool. And that was my big goal. I wanted to get some money so I can get some better fits and look cool. And so it's always something, in college, I remember burning CDs and peddling those things around when Napster was a thing. So it was always something sort of driving, where's an opportunity? Where can I make a dollar here and find something?
mm. It's interesting. Definitely interesting. So, like, just talk about like worst case versus best case scenarios, right? I mean, obviously, you're talking about huge acquisitions and mergers. I mean, and you're talking about a couple million to precisely a couple $1 billion in range, right? So, without naming names, what's the worst experience you've had dealing with this type of business?
For us as a company or just seeing clients work?
Either or, which one? I mean, which one stands out to you the most?
The one I remember, I guess even just trying to connect with some of the entrepreneurs that may be listening. early beginnings, they're rough. There's just so many hard lessons learned that you can't anticipate on. And for us was understanding the nature of security. Like
Mm-hmm.
it really takes about 3 years to build a product and have some maturity of security. We were handling $100 million deal. We weren't there yet. We were getting users, but we didn't have a product that was built for scale. We had to rebuild it. And we learned this because our site was crashing while this deal was happening. And it kept happening. And even though I go to the client promising this was never going to happen again, and it would happen again. And it was such an embarrassing moment. I remember even stuffing a couple $100 in an envelope with a note saying, I truly apologize. I owe you night out. Uh, yeah. So I remember that just working on our first real transactions in the early beginnings and making some big mistakes that was tough. It was tough for us it was a good learning experience. It's a big wake up call on what you need to do and how you got to be prepared and make sure you're delivering value, make sure you're communicating how you can handle those tough situations when things are going wrong, because you can't hide from them. You need to be able to step up, take accountability and ownership. But that's probably one of the big things that went awry in our early years.
So it sounds like you had some serious growing pains. I mean, with that, I mean, was it hard for you to overcome it? And when you did overcome it, because obviously you did, like what steps and procedures did you put in to make sure that these things wouldn't happen moving forward?
It's almost, I'd say it's pretty natural. It's a big wake up call and you scramble to figure it out. For us was getting experts. I knew we had a team and we had these failing points. And part of it was the team was pretty junior. We need to bring some seasoned professional. We ended up hiring a seasoned developer to come in and help architect a plan so that we can rebuild our product and design it for scale so that we can redesign it, build it around microservices. Usually when you prototype a software application, it's just one big app. It's a monolithic app. A lot of things, it's almost spaghetti coded because you're reworking things, prototyping and moving things around. We rebuilt it with a microservices architecture into little apps that talk to each other. So one thing breaks here, it doesn't take everything out. And that was a big thing that you learn from. You bring in experts to help you problem solve. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing was just being conscious about what problems you have, trying to look around the corner, what's ahead, but then really being proactive about who's going to help you. Because if you don't have the expertise in house, who can you grow your network, expand to get access to those people that can help you solve those problems?
Hmm. Definitely interesting. So, I mean, what version of software are you guys on? I mean, for the average listener, versioning meaning that, okay, 1.0 is the first version and then it's 1.2.3 or 3.4. So what version is your platform is right now currently?
It's tough to say that we do weekly pushes of code out, and I don't directly manage the team. And if I were to put something on it, maybe a version 4 or 5. I almost think it takes about version 3 to get a level of maturity that the market becomes acceptance. I know some of these large companies, they will not use your solution unless you're 6 years in the market.
Hmm.
So there is some truth around that in terms of the maturity of your product. Your customer base says a lot about that. How many customers you have, what kind of customers.
Hmm.
But for us, we do weekly builds that we push out. Broadly looking at it, we're constantly rebuilding parts of it. Then we have initiatives to do bigger rebuilds. And it could be the underpinning architecture, technology of the software. It could be more of the interface, which is actually visible. But yeah, we've gone through quite a bit. It's never ending. There is no build an app and it sits there and the work's done. If you got actual users on there, they're going to have different needs.
Hmm.
You're going to be growing, requirements are going to come in, technology constantly changes. So you're never ending when it comes to updating the tools.
Hmm. I think that's interesting. I mean, you made one key remark about being 6 years vetted before particular clients would even sign a contract to use that platform. So, Mike, my next question is, how long have you been on the journey to get where you are currently?
DealRoom, we started in 2012. So we got a good 10 years of working on this solution. First 5 years was really tough. When we talked the pain point of here's this big client and struggling with that, but even getting those first clients, we worked in industries very conservative, finance.
Hmm.
Who wants to trust you with the large multi-million dollar transaction? It took a lot of knocking on doors before we finally got those first opportunities.
Hmm. So when you're saying knocking on doors, I'm thinking you're talking about like virtual doors, or were you guys actually physically doing like out the trunk of the car knocking on the doors?
Virtually. I use LinkedIn. I reach out to folks, practitioners, say, hey, I'm trying to build, I'm trying to solve this problem, trying to get people's attention. And that those are the early entrepreneurial founder sales. It's a lot of work.
Hmm. Definitely, it's interesting. That's definitely a hell of a story. So it leads me to like my next question. I mean, you was talking about like your parents being not from the U.S. So what kind of like parents did you have? Were they both entrepreneurs? Did you have an uncle that was an entrepreneur? Where are you getting your entrepreneurial insight from?
I had Indian immigrant parents. I grew up in small town Nebraska, and I don't know if it's an Indian thing from the region we're at. It was pretty common to own a little motel in the middle of nowhere, and that's what they did. I watched them, grew up watching them operate that business.
Mm,
I think the one thing I've learned looking back was my dad would always be doing something. There was never just sitting around doing nothing. It was always something. It was changing the carpets, it was shampooing the carpets, it was fixing little things that broke. It was always some little thing to improve. And I think that helped when even now we talk about agile world and how do you build a culture of continuous improvement. But I was exposed to that pretty early, even though he just had a pretty basic business. It was very bootstrapped. It wasn't that he had a bunch of money or took a big loan from the bank and did a big remodel at once. He never did that. It was always year after year, just little incremental changes continuously. And he took this pretty crappy, dumpy motel and turned it into something that was pretty nice and operated profitably, but it was all through the series of iterations. I think that's one thing looking back that we take to heart in the culture we have in the business we're building today is even new hires. I'm always challenging them from the beginning. I want you to create a list and document every little opportunity you see to improve. And I criticize them for not coming up with enough because ultimately I want them to develop that muscle that it's part of that culture to constantly look for ways that we can get better, even the micro things, the macro things. But everybody in the company needs to take ownership so we can have that culture of continuous improvement.
nice. So I mean, you're talking about agile, and you're talking about continuous improvement. So if you can go back in time and take what you know about agile now, where would you go back, and what would you change if you only had like a day to do it?
I would go back to starting even this business. I would go back. I think the thing I would change is we went right out to building a product and taking it out to market
Mm,
with a lot of assumptions. And I feel like this is a natural founder thing to do, where you take ownership of this idea and you build a solution and you're, I don't want to say you're blind to it, but there's a lot of biases that come in play because it's your idea, it's you're championing it. And a lot of the things you're doing are very much based on assumptions, and you may not be conscious to it. If I were to go back, because the big monumental change for us was when we did have a product, we came to this realization we screwed up big time. We put a product in the market and it's no way going to get market fit. It was going in the wrong direction. And we had to reboot. We had to start from scratch. And that hard lesson allowed us to focus on the market. Forget about what we're thinking and what we know what we want to do. Let's spend the time and have conversations with these prospective customers. Let's understand them. Let's talk to them and understand their pain points and validate the problems we're solving and really talk to them to the point where you're being unbiased. You're getting to this mindset where you know nothing or whatever you know is wrong. So you can intently listen, understand what they're thinking, understand how they feel about their problems, why they feel that way, document it. And you learn so much. We learned that, hey, we're focusing on the wrong problem. There's a bigger problem we could solve. And it's more important for them. They're willing to pay more for it. They're more interested in solving that problem. And then when you go through creating solutions, you keep that feedback loop there,
mm,
get that feedback, and you're going to get better ideas than what you have. That the people that are closest to the problems are likely to have ideas to solve it. I think that was a big thing. If I were to go back, I would really create that feedback loop as early as
mm,
possible and do that before we even spend a dollar building. I would, because it doesn't cost any money to talk to somebody and truly understand that problem. Even I meet new entrepreneurs now and say, okay, great, I got this thing I'm doing. Okay, how many people did you talk to validate that that's a problem we're solving for? And I challenge them like, all right, go talk to like 40 people. Because you'll, if you do it in a right way, where it's, again, I'm biased, can I come up with questions? I can say, hey, essay, what's your biggest challenge you face today?
Hmm.
And so, whatever it is, and then build it, at least understand that and look for patterns. And then you can say, oh, I can see some things happening here that if I can try to prioritize and understand what's the biggest problems for this market I'm trying to serve. And then that allows you to validate that and get a sense of, am I solving the right problem to begin with?
Nice, nice. So,
People skip it. They don't want to do the work. They
yeah.
skip it over and say, no, I'm going to build this. I'm going to build this little thing. And it's like, okay, how do you know people actually want it? And then once you've done that, then again, same thing, very iterative on the solution. You don't need to go hire programmers, just start mocking stuff up. I hire a student, say, hey, let's just keep mock this stuff up just so I can get in front of people and get feedback. It's so much easier to change a mock up than it is to change something that's finished and already coded. Way cheaper to do that. And you're going to save a bunch of time. You deliver a finished product and people start giving you the feedback and then you cringe like, oh, I got to change that. I got to change this. It's going to cost me a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of time. Well, if you had that tight feedback loop, you could have done it through those stages and it would allowed you to end up with a product that was more fit to your customer.
Yeah, I think that this is a hell of a insightful answer, and it kind of you keep reiterating about like the loop back, then the loop back and the feedback, right? So that goes right back to like agile. So if you don't mind, for like the average listener that's listening, and maybe this will be the first time they may hear agile, right? Like, could you define agile in your work environment? Like, how do you guys utilize it, and what is it doing for you?
The idea of agile is to respond to changes as they're happening. And it's associated with the project management role or project management approach. We're very familiar with a waterfall or plan driven approach. A good example is if you build a house, right? You build a house, you're going to work with an architect and they're going to create a blueprint. Once the blueprint's done, from the time you use that blueprint to building the house, probably not going to be a lot of changes. You just tend to follow the plan. There's certain projects where it makes sense, where your variables aren't changing. But when it comes to building software, there are a lot of assumptions that you have. You may look at a profile of your customer and say, okay, I'm going to build a software tool. It's going to have these 7 key features. And as an idea with Agile is like, okay, why don't we focus on one, figure out what the most important one is. Let's spend our time and energy instead of creating this big plan for all 7 features that's going to turn this massive document. We're just going to focus on the one and detail it out and build it and be able to put it out there and get that feedback. And we're continuously trying to get feedback. We may find out that, hey, this other feature we thought was really important isn't. We're just going to delete that off our outline. This other one, and the idea is that we're trying to keep this all in order of priority, do the most important things first. And said, hey, this thing we thought wasn't that important. We should push it up on the top of our list because it's a lot more important than we thought. So now all of a sudden you're making these adjustments in your plan as you're building and you're responding to the feedback and updating your plan accordingly. So you're being really iterative. You're just continuously updating your plan as you're building the solution. And it allows you to be a lot more efficient because now you can keep these changes going and deliver something that customer actually wants instead of I follow the plan and then I get it to the customer and they vomit all this feedback to you. And that gets you back to making all these unexpected changes, which extend your project timeline, end up occurring a lot more costs.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to you speak, I mean, it's like, I would, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? I think like you're 50% analytical, 50% creative, and I could hear it because like on one side of you sound so much like an investment banker, but on the other side you sound so much like a project developer of software and code and development. So bringing both these hemispheres together is definitely interesting to hear it in this space. So my next question is like, do you know that about you, or is that something that you've kind of just grown into and you just kind of owned it over a period of time?
Hey, I was just talking about this the other day. I podcast and did a quick introduction for a group. And the thing is, I even surprised myself looking back because I was always an introvert as a kid. I was a person that was extremely fearful of any public speaking. I hate anytime I did it, I was terrible at it. I shied away from it. And now I'm constantly out there getting in front of an audience, talking. And my brother, I remember about 6 years ago, actually sat me down and said, hey, if anybody I know, you're the one person that's a full 180. You used to be such a reserved person, and now you're the person that works the room. How'd you do it? And I told him, I said, I made up my mind what I wanted to do. I knew where I wanted to go. If I'm going to build a company, I want to lead it. I got to be a leader. I got to come out of that shell. And I would push myself incrementally to do it. I remember my first strategy was I'm going to go to these networking events for the tech guys. I figured, you know what, these tech geeks are all going to be shy and it won't be so bad. I was dead wrong. I was like, they're not that shy. And I found myself in that same spot where I was this wallflower. And then I pushed myself to say, you know what, I'm going to get myself in front of somebody. I'm going to put my hand out and say hi. And I did that and realized it's actually not that hard. Once you can break the ice, it becomes really easy to have that conversation. So I started doing that. I got to a point where we hired a PR person for the company, and she was asking me my comfortability of public speaking. I said, look, I've done a little bit of it. I'm not great at it, but I'm willing to take the challenge to get better.
Mhm.
And we looked at hiring some of those executive coaches that help you with public speaking, and they're insanely expensive. The hourly rates up there, and I'm sure if you're in the position, you can hire them. But I said, hey, why don't we find an alternative? And I started taking theater acting classes. I took
Very nice.
yeah, various public storytelling, took stand-up comedy, these things, and they were fun. I was like, wow, I'm actually with a group of folks, you're learning together, it's a social environment. So they were a lot more cost effective, but it helped quite a bit. And that allowed me to come out of my shell. So it's one, just being conscious of who you are. If
Mhm.
you have these blind spots, at least know it. You don't want to be defensive about it. And I see that personality sometimes where we try to be the know-it-all and this and that. I'd rather be vulnerable. I'd rather challenge people to point out where my deficiencies are, get into that acknowledgement that I'm blind to my weaknesses.
Mhm.
So the more I can get folks pointing it out and saying, hey, how can I get better? Ask for that feedback, get people to challenge you. Now that you take what you don't know, at least know what you don't know, I can proactively improve in that area. Though when I started getting into the leadership side, our company was 5 people. I knew I sucked at being a leader. There's things I was missing out. I knew I couldn't motivate the team well. I started reading leadership books, thought this would help me. Wasn't the most helpful. I started reading these psychology books. The organizational psychology books were way more helpful to understand how people work. What's the work environment you need to create for people to thrive? And I learned about creating a communication framework where you can create a work environment that everybody truly feels their voice is being heard. And it's so important because you enable everybody across the company to be able to speak up about ideas on how they can get better. And that's the biggest thing I've learned. The best ideas don't come from the top. And then also pointing out where the problems are. What can we do to improve? Here's some cracks that are appearing. Let's fix them before they blow through the floor. So it's so important to create that communication platform and get your team comfortable to speak up, acknowledging achievements. When people have contributed work and they made this achievement, acknowledging it, when to acknowledge it one-on-one, when to acknowledge it broadly across the company, and creating this environment where your team can socialize with each other so they build relationships and feel they work among friends. Those things they learn from organizational psychology books. I didn't learn from the leadership stuff, but that's that understanding. Hey, if I didn't proactively try to improve my leadership skills, I've never would have been exposed to any of that and understand. Now I know my goals. I know what I need to achieve, but I want to be open about it because I don't know all this stuff. Now I can constantly ask the team to contribute. Say, if we're together going to try to create an organization with a strong communication framework, how do we do that? Let them bring up their ideas, bring that, and that allows you to set by example, but also don't put all the burden on you. I think entrepreneurs tend to do that where they take so much ownership of their problems. It's not always your problem, it's somebody else's. Like, figure out how to reassign it if that's the case, because that's how you got to build the team where everybody can take accountability and ownership.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening to you speak. I mean, like I could tell, like you're profound when it comes to general leadership, right? So how does that transition into like your work life family balance? Like, I mean, are you like a leader in the household per se, or are you more laid back when you come home after the clock is done?
My wife's the one that's very laid back. So I have to be the one that kind of comes in and still keeps that level of, hey, here's some discipline or here's some goals. I had a friend who gave me an idea to sort of do kind of like a New Year's, we review resolution, but it's uh, just really address with the family what's our current state, right? and walk them through like what are our goals as a family? What are we trying? And then letting the kids, I have three little kids, 11, and my daughter's 11, my two boys are 6 and 9. And it's like the state of address, right? Where is our current state right now? What have we achieved this past year? What were some of the best highlights we had? What are our goals for this next year? And letting them speak up and say, hey, my youngest, I want to play soccer. I want to get good at soccer. I want the oldest one loves piano and track. That's where I want to really focus on. The middle kid loves playing video games, gamer, but like, what do you want to do beyond that? He's like, he actually wants to learn to code and write games. So it's like, okay, what are we now? We're going to start working towards those. What do we need to do to plan around that? What are we thinking about for trips if we want to do something for fun as a family together? But enabling that, I think that's like, so it's a little bit of that where I take some of these fundamentals I learned in business, and the idea is just to expose them to it. I do it with my daughter, especially, where let me just talk to them like an adult and talk to about these things. That's the biggest thing. It's a whole passion thing I could get into, where I feel that kids don't get exposed to these leadership lessons at that point that they could, because when should you teach it? I learned this stuff in my 30s. Why can't I learn in my 20s or teens even? So I think there's a little bit of that where it's not the laid back. It's saying, hey, I want you to progress and develop as a parent. My principles and my responsibilities are to feed you healthy and educate you.
Hmm.
So I'm going to do my best. So it may come off, I might get criticized by my wife, like you talk to them like they're grown ups, but it's like, fine, they're going to learn a little quicker. We talk about that. Like we talk about purpose. We talk about your goals. How do you achieve those goals? And it's a similar thing, but I think when they understand that, they know that mom's more laid back and she'll let me be the kid, but dad's kind of there, and he's the person, the business person, and brings a little bit of it at home. The balance can be tough. We're a growing business and there's a lot of going on. So, I'm fortunate to have a family that understands that. At times like today, I'm traveling and your sort of time balance is a little different. It's not operating on a 9 to 5 schedule where I'm there. And that's where it's being conscious of how you spend your time with your family.
Hmm.
I look at it where, do I just sit home and I'm watching TV and I'm in the same room and that's my time with the family? Or are we proactively doing stuff? I got my time I'm spending with you. I want to make the most out of it. What do we want to do together? Are we going to do some activities together? Are we going to sit there? I'm even booking a time with my daughter because even though I'm traveling, I said, let's do a weekly check-in and let's just start talking through some things. I think some of this stuff is rubbed off. At 6 years old, she did a lemonade stand. That would turned out really well. COVID happened. She's like, Dad, what do I do? I can't do my lemonade stand. And so, well, you got to do everything like the rest of the world. They got to figure out your digital distribution model. Now she makes handmade jewelry and sells it online. So let's
Nice.
check in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that. I mean, you're talking about legacy building. It's not necessarily you're steering your kids to replace you in your business, but you're educating them on the processes and procedures that you wish that you would have known that you were younger. So I definitely commend you for that. I mean, I think anyone that's an entrepreneur with kids, if we're not doing this, we're doing our kids a disservice for sure.
I think part of it was reflecting on my own values. I did this talk track 10 years ago, actually, and it was advice I'd give myself 10 years ago
Mm,
prior. And it got me to really, really think about my core values. And with the kids, I said, look, I really believe in this, that when you're conscious about the core values, you'll take more accountability and ownership and be proactive about adhering to them and make that part of you. I'm going to teach you my core values.
mm,
You can evolve them as you grow up, but I at least want to give you something to start with. And we talked about it earlier that here's discipline, here's continuous learning and empathy. This is what it means. This is what I operate off of. This is where I attribute to the success and what's going to carry me forward. I want you to at least give you a starting place at the very least, because I learned this from experience. And I want to harness this experience and provide it to you and give examples of that, like why discipline is so important. If you're not going to learn the ability to get comfortable doing the things you're uncomfortable doing, that's going to prevent you from doing a lot of things. Because even building a business, yes, there's some fun, great parts, but there's a lot of things that aren't fun and great, but you just got to do it. I'm not a big fan of the modeling and finance stuff. I used to, but I don't now at a point I don't like doing that anymore. But I got to do it. I got to create projections. I got to be able to present it, talk through the numbers. I don't like doing it as much, but I just do it. It's a discipline. So it's like those skills you really want to embed and give them the example of why that attributes to your success. Stuff I've reflected on, distilled, and say, okay, here's my key 3 values if anybody asks. But it allows me to articulate them. I can talk about them more. I can embody it. I can make sure I'm living up to that because it's conscious, it's top of mind, and it's something you make part of you.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm loving your philosophies. I mean, and it goes back to you're talking about continuing education. So this next question is a three-part question in that area of expertise, right? So on your journey to get to where you are, right, within that 10, 15-year span, what books did you read to help you get to where you are currently?
The one when I talked about empathy earlier, there's a book called Just Listen by Mark Golston, and PhD psychologist, and the book's all about empathy. It's called Just Listen, and it's just that's what it's about. That one made a big impact, especially as a leader. A lot of times we enter these conversations, we have objectives. I want to get you to do something. I'm trying to convince you something. And it becomes top of mind that we're not really listening to the other person. So you
Mm-hmm.
got to learn how to put that to the side and get in that mindset we talked about earlier, where you assume what you know is wrong or you know nothing, and focus on listening. You're trying to get a good interview. You want to make sure your audience can listen to this podcast and walk away with some takeaways so the time was valuable for them. I want to make sure, knowing that I can understand that that's your goal. You're thinking about that. You're thinking about your audience. You haven't even expressed any self-interest through this whole conversation. How is a person feeling? Why do they feel that way? And it allows you to understand their goals and challenges. If I can align myself around your goals and your challenges, that's going to allow me to be a lot more successful. Now we're talking about how to create value of the things that you actually care about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it builds off of that whole listen first. Influence is such a big thing. And you don't go talk to people. I like taking the extreme example of disputes, right? Because if you have a dispute about something, a lot of times you can argue that to death and both people walk away and they still believe in the same thing. So how do you truly influence the other person? And it starts with listening, because until I truly understand why you think the way that you do,
Mm-hmm.
and understand to the point where I actually believe it. So you know what, you're right. You're right in the fact that you're right, and I get why you think that way. Like that, we don't do that. We just want to argue and defend our point, and we're
Yeah.
focused on that. But if I put it aside and say, well, walk me through that. Like, let me know. It changes the dynamic so much, because now I've connected with you. Like I got to the point where I actually do understand why you think the way that, because there's a reason why everybody thinks the way they do. There is, and it's to you to go discover it and figure it out. And when you do, that's the magic gets unlocked there. Now, person feels felt, they're more inclined to reciprocate. They're going to listen back and saying, hey, well, tell me why you think the way you did.
Hmm.
Now we're getting into this coming together, and let's start problem solving. Maybe we can find a good compromise for this. That's why that listening first. I think that book, Just Listen, I recommend it. I looked up to Mark as a mentor. I was fortunate enough to actually get him on my podcast and say, hey, I want to just talk to you because you've been such a good impact. Just that book you published on my professional development and being a leader, listening first.
Hmm. Wow, wow. So it goes to my second half of this question. I mean, I think Listen First is a solid book, and obviously you're author as well too. So let's talk about like your books and what can someone discover by reading one of your.
So we have two books published. We have a third one. I'd say the first one maybe a little more recognized, but probably more applicable. It was for me a learning journey about all these agile project management techniques and really simplifying it, because a lot of it's from the software engineering space,
Okay.
and they use a lot of acronyms. And I think that space continues to evolve these concepts till they're pretty complex. And I wanted to introduce it to the finance industry. I'm borrowing ideas from the software industry, and I'm introducing it to the finance folks in M&A that, generally speaking, have a pretty short attention span. So I need to simplify things as much as possible. So what we did basically was take a lot of these concepts of agile from the software engineering culture, and we simplified it to a point where probably high school kids could understand it. Not a lot of complex language, pretty fundamental concepts of how you keep lists in a descending order of priority instead of tagging them high priority. How do you conduct these stand-up meetings? How do you do these retrospectives so that you can get that feedback loop and keep iterating, course correcting? And we published it as a book that fortunate enough to have a friend influence as a framework so that people can adopt this framework and help their organizations move to more of an agile based approach on their financial activities or acquisitions.
It's interesting. So I mean, like coming from like I think the comment I made earlier about you being left brain, right brain, like your tool sets, right? I mean, from a financial standpoint, the tool sets are usually completely different versus technology, right? So like, what tools do you use on a day-to-day basis that you would not be able to do what you're doing without having access to that platform or platforms?
Slack, we use Slack a lot. It's just chat, it allows us to run a distributed team. I think that's just powerful communication. My inbox is messy, but whatever comes with Slack is going to get more attention and prioritized. I think that, and then just the collaboration tools. We use Google Workspace. Being able to do real-time document editing allows us to have multiple people working together. I think that the collaboration tools are big. We use our own product DealRoom for actually tracking our own internal tasks and to-dos. But any kind of project management tool, there's a bunch out there. Whatever suits your need, because simple to complex. I think the combination using a project management tool, a chat tool, and then a productivity suite like Office 365 or Google Workspace.
Nice, nice. So this I want to go back to your baby girl, your daughter, with her lemonade stand that turned into selling earrings online. So I want you to talk about her in say 20, 30 years from now. Let's say she's old enough now, she has her corporation, she's about to do her first acquisition or her first merger, and she's hitting her first hurdle. What words of wisdom would you like to give to her to help her cross over that finish line to make that acquisition?
It's probably going to be things we've already talked about. I feel like a lot of this stuff is just real fundamental principles, and it may be just a reminder of, hey, we talked about problem solving, we talked about decision making. I think one of the things that and a lot of this is prepare. Like, I want to arm you as my child with the skills to be able to accomplish anything you want in this world.
Mhm.
We talk about what's the greatest skill. It's like convince anyone anything. How do you do that? We start talking about empathy and some of these things. But even at an early age, when she was about 6 years old, these kids learned to say thank you and sorry. And I have a rule that I don't want them to say thank you or sorry as standalone words.
Mhm.
And the reason why is because they're transactional words. They don't have meaning. And I won't want you to use those words unless you add the for what, like why, thank you for what, sorry for what, hey, sorry I lost your umbrella.
Mhm.
So even when we go to the grocery store and check out, it's not that transactional. Thank you, bye.
Mhm.
It's, hey, thank you for bagging the groceries so quickly. Thank you for the small talk. Thank you for smiling. Just whatever it is, add a reason why. And I think that helps because a lot of these things, when we look at problems at the end of the day, 90% of challenges we come across in the business environment are to a communication problem.
Mhm.
And if we can start building this behavior of elaborating that why early, and we catch ourselves even as we've grown up, we like, hey, can you do this for me? If you just tacked on that one little line of why, all of a sudden you created more meaning, you're getting better alignment, you're getting the person to be more likely to actually follow through.
Mhm.
And if we can develop that early, just starting with our little transactional meaningless words, thank you and sorry, and start building that pattern of explaining why. Now it works against me as a parent because, hey, can I go to so and so's house so we can go do, then you're like, okay. But it makes a big difference. I think getting that thinking at an early age allows them to start thinking one layer deeper on all these things when they're communicating, and allows them to have stronger communication and just think a little bit more about what they're saying.
Wow. So I mean, with that, how does someone find you or find Deal Room? I mean, obviously you have online presence, you have social media. What's the best platform?
Yeah, if somebody wants to learn about M&A, our two websites, we have 1,500 pages of publicly available content on M&A between dealroom.net and mascience.com. I don't use a lot of social media, but I'm on LinkedIn. So it's just Kison Patel on LinkedIn.
Great, great. So I got a couple bonus questions for you, and one of them, I'm intrigued to see what you're gonna say. If you could spend 24 hours with anyone, dead or alive, uninterrupted for those 24 hours, who would it be and why?
Probably Elon Musk, just somebody that's continuously fascinating and unbelievable level of achievements.
Mm-hmm.
I've read his bio and just been very intrigued by the level of brilliance that he operates on.
Hmm. Interesting. So another question for you, and this is just kind of a general fun one based upon what you said earlier about, doing stand up and doing drama. Are those things that you still have passion for right now, or were those things that you were just doing to help build you as a speaker?
It, I did at the time, I did it for professional development so I can get comfortable speaking in public.
Mm,
I think as it evolves, it becomes part of you and the interest grew later. Like I wasn't super interested. It was something, again, a discipline. I wasn't comfortable doing it, so
mm,
therefore I didn't like doing it. But as I pursued it, I became comfortable doing it. Now I enjoy doing it. I didn't like podcasts when I first started doing it. I didn't like it the first year. I didn't like it the second year. Third year, I got a pretty good voice. I like the sound of this. And now I pursue it going to the sixth year. I love podcasting. I'm happy to hop on a guest podcast and riff. And it gets fun. You get passionate about it when you start seeing the progress. You get good at it and you find what you really like about it. So I think now I am very interested. Sales is a really good example. I'm a builder. At the end of the day, that's these different types of CEOs. I'm definitely more of the builder type, and I didn't have interest in sales.
mm.
But now, where I'm currently set up, I have executives that take care of all the product development and all these operational pieces that I'm not interested in at this time. I really get to focus on sales, and that's what I'm super interested in. And it's going back and taking these communication skills I've learned, being able to work and develop a team. I really enjoy it and still find it challenging because now I'm overcoming these challenges that I try to avoid in the earlier parts of building the business.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I think that's a hell of an insightful full answer to that question. I definitely appreciate that. So going into closing, I mean, obviously you're a fellow podcaster, you're a host, you've been on air for a long period of time. So the Boston Case show is now yours. You're now the host, and you have opportunity to interview me. Any questions that came up during this interview that you would like to ask me?
What's like the biggest takeaway for you? What do you think is the one thing that struck out as, hey, this is something that may actually be a thing I could change, I could try. I'm always curious about the level of influence you actually make on people because we talk a lot. We can shit talk all day, but what actually can drive a change? Is motivation something you can teach? And
Mm,
I'm wondering if there's an actual thing that comes out of it that you would encourage
mm.
that would actually make a change.
I think for you, I mean, in this entire thing, the thing that keeps reoccurring to me, and again, we talked about so many different topics and so much different things in business and everything else, but for you, I think it's just leadership and just the way you view leadership as being a universal thing. It is not something that you just do in your office. Again, you're a leader in your office environment, but you know what your strengths and weaknesses are. But at the same time, you're a leader at home and you're leading your kids to be leaders as well in your vision to what a leader should be, which goes back to your three principles that you said earlier in the show.
So professional development that if you do, it's professional development, develop yourself and then be able to develop others.
I think that's right based upon what I've heard from you. I would say that that's definitely right. But I think the key word is just the way you organize your leadership. I mean, there's obviously strict leaders, there's soft leaders, and you're neither strict or soft. You're kind of more of a logical leader that says, okay, things need to be done a particular way. But again, you give like the reasons why. Like, this is why it should be done this way. Here's the cause and effect of why things should be done this way. And you're doing it at home as well with your kids. You're saying to say thank you, but thank you for what? And you're following through more than just the action. Is the action supported by the definition of what the action was supported for in the first place? So I think you as a leader, I think that's my key takeaway that I got from you is just understanding leadership from a different point of view. And I definitely love your leadership style for sure.
Thank you.
Well, I definitely appreciate you, man. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I don't want to suck up too much more of your time. I think we could probably stay on this podcast and end up being like Joe Rogan and talk for 2.5 hours easily. But I definitely appreciate your time. I think you gave us some great insight. I think if anyone that does not understand what acquisitions and mergers are by the end of this podcast, you should have some kind of profound, eye-opening moment to realize that this is something that you potentially can grow into, and there's different levels to mergers and acquisitions. So I definitely appreciate you being on the show today.
My pleasure. I appreciate you having me, SA.
S.A. Grant.